December the 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Japan attacks the US Pacific Fleet in Hawaii with colossal military force.
The gates of hell had been opened up. The scene is absolutely cataclysmic.
What happens over the next 2.5 hours will lead to the deaths of nearly 2,400 US servicemen and change history. Using rare archive and eyewitness accounts, this is the attack on Pearl Harbor as it unfolded, minute by minute.
It's one of those crucial days in history, like the attack on the Twin Towers on September the 11th. You know the world won't be the same after as it had been before.
The assault began at 7:48 a.m. when Japanese planes attacked the airfields. In less than 10 minutes, they had taken out a key part of the island's air defenses.
I couldn't get it in my head that they were attacking us, and I don't know anybody else that could.
They have now turned their attention to their prime targets, the battleships in the harbor itself.
There is no hope for the Americans to avoid what is coming, which is going to be an absolutely devastating attack.
The temperature's about 80. There was a little light breeze blowing down off the mountain there, and the air was still, and you could smell the flowers in the air. It was just a wonderful day.
They had dances on Saturday night, parties on Saturday night, and a lot of the military are just sleeping in.
They're beginning to go to mess call. There are some religious services ongoing. It's just a normal, calm Sunday morning routine.
One minute before the attack on Pearl Harbor begins, Frank Emond and the band on the USS Pennsylvania are preparing to play.
The Navy plays the Star Spangled Banner at 8 o'clock every morning. We were lined up to raise the flag.
Closing in on Pearl Harbor is an assault group of 183 Japanese planes from 6 aircraft carriers. They've already attacked 2 airfields on the island and are now about to hit the harbor.
At 5 minutes to 8, they sound the bugle call to let everybody know that it's almost time for colors. And at that time, I heard a noise. I looked up in the air, and there was a line of planes coming in from the right-hand side.
The first target is in the center of the harbor, the seaplane base on Ford Island. It's one of the last lines of America's air defenses.
The first one peeled off and something come off the airplane. I thought the tail assembly had broken off or something, so I watched it hit the hangar on the air station there and exploded in flame and smoke.
The initial response to the attack is disbelief. Lieutenant Commander Ramsey is on Ford Island, and he thinks that it's just some American pilot hot-dogging it. He wants to get the serial number off of the plane and report him to his commanding officer.
With the base destroyed, the attackers now turn their attention to their primary target, the fleet itself. 40 bombers line up in 2 groups.
One group is going to go after Battleship Row and the outboard battleships there. The other group coming in against the other side of Ford Island is still hoping to find perhaps an American carrier.
The skies seem to be full of airplanes, small prop airplanes, and you can see big red spots on the fuselage and wings. So immediately you knew that they were not our airplanes. The Japanese were there.
The U.S. Pacific Fleet has 3 carriers based at Pearl Harbor. But today, their moorings are empty.
From
the Japanese perspective, battleships are still the coin of the realm. If they can sink 4 or 5 American battleships, that will constitute success for the operation.
All 8 battleships happened to be in port at the same time, which was a rarity. It had not been achieved since the summer of 1941.
7 of them are lined up in Battleship Row on the east of Ford Island. The 8th, the flagship of the Pacific Fleet, USS Pennsylvania, is in dry dock undergoing repairs.
Optimally, what should happen is the torpedo planes attack first, because they are going to have to attack low and slow. They're going to be very vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire.
But already, the Japanese plan is unraveling. Miscommunication between air crews has seen the dive bombers jump the gun.
So consequently, the first wave goes in helter-skelter immediately, and you have simultaneous attacks happening at once.
As the first group of torpedo bombers prepares to attack, they are hit by pillars of black smoke drifting upwards from the earlier dive bomber hits. And it's not just smoke that gets in the way.
With the sun in their eyes, the crews had a very difficult time seeing anything.
But through the haze and the glare, Masamitsu Yoshioka gets a fleeting glimpse of his target.
Masterの形から見て、コロラド型の戦艦だな、それを狙っていくことにしました。私もそう思いましたけど、一番気もそう思ったと思いまして。
Yoshioka's target is one of the 4 ships moored on the opposite side of Ford Island to Battleship Row. The torpedo unit's leader arrows in. But as he nears his target, he suddenly pulls out. His wingman follows him.
Planes immediately behind them thought that, well, they must have launched against the battleship, so we're going to do that as well.
Despite reservations, Masamitsu Yoshioka releases his torpedo.
日本の軍艦に比べて戦艦小さいなと思ったんですけども。
He hits his target, creating an enormous explosion.
And she is hit right in the center of the ship.
Within moments, a second torpedo slams into the ship's hull, but it's not the target the Japanese had wanted. Masamitsu has hit the USS Utah, an old and largely demilitarized destroyer, and not one of their main battleship targets.
私のはユタで本当に失敗したと思いましたけどもですね、他の人たちがよくやってくれてですね。だけど私はどうしてもこの年になってもですね、ユタのことが気になってですね、あまり大きな顔はできませんでした。
USS Utah is not the only victim of this attack. One of the torpedoes hits a second ship, USS Raleigh, moored behind. But this is an even less valuable target than Utah.
The pilots should have exhausted all possibilities before attacking these lesser ships. And they really were taken to task once they returned to the carrier by their superiors for making poor target selection. They really could not see what in the name of heaven they were aiming at.
But they're not the only ones making poor target decisions in the confusion. 2 minutes into the raid, American casualties are mounting, but not a single torpedo has been fired at any battleships. But this is about to change as a new wave of 24 torpedo bombers head towards Battleship Row. Hundreds of feet below the attacking torpedo bombers, crews on the battleships are unaware of what is about to befall them.
I was down in the office wrapping presents to be sent home for Christmas when the speaker system hollered, "Air attack, air attack. All hands seek cover."
Everybody was in their battle stations in 3 minutes, and doors were closed, the hatches were closed. Our first guns were fired within 30 seconds.
The second group of torpedo bombers descend into the southeast lock. They now have their prized battleship targets in their sights on Battleship Row.
This body of water was almost like a bowling alley heading down toward the battleships. The pilots could see that these two ships, the West Virginia and Oklahoma, were the golden targets.
For these were skilled aerial technicians that were going to deliver an 18-foot torpedo that could blow a hole in the side of the battleship that a truck could drive through.
And they were coming in pairs. One plane on one side of the pair was to take one battleship, and then the plane on the opposite side was to take the ship next to it.
But as the lead pair get ready to drop their torpedoes, planes from the earlier attacks cross their path.
There were multiple aircraft crossing against the grain, as it were. Things got very confused, and then those aircraft had to abort and circle around again.
It's valuable time wasted. The Japanese are rapidly losing the advantage of surprise.
The locks were broken so that ammunition could be brought to the guns. The volume and intensity of the American anti-aircraft fire swells very, very quickly.
Despite the initial confusion, the Japanese bombers line up again. Braving anti-aircraft fire, they move in and target USS West Virginia and USS Oklahoma.
Very, very quickly, the first 6 aircraft came in, bam, 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 within seconds of each other. And all these torpedoes were running at the same time.
You can see streaks of torpedoes now striking the West Virginia. And then you can also see torpedo streaks and some disturbance in the water of torpedoes coming towards the Oklahoma.
The hits on the battleships set both ablaze, immediately killing hundreds of crew. Incredibly, these first 2 torpedo hits on a battleship at Pearl Harbor are caught by a Japanese film camera.
These dramatic pictures are being taken by aircraft in the air, and you see the water geysers, which my grandfather witnessed, that were going 90 to 100 feet or more into the air.
Commander of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral Kimmel, is at home when he receives a message. Air raid, Pearl Harbor. This is no drill.
He's due to play golf with the Army commander, General Short. He cancels the golf. He gets into his uniform and prepares to leave for his headquarters.
Admiral Kimmel could very clearly see the harbor and see the battleships lined up against Ford Island. And so he was watching the torpedo explosions one after another on the ships under his command, and it must have been an absolutely devastating experience for him.
Despite receiving a warning 10 days ago to be on alert for an attack, Kimmel had not put the base on a war footing.
But this was a man who had never failed in his professional career. His service record was unblemished. Everything he had done or been asked to do, he had succeeded at. And so here he was witnessing catastrophic failure on his part. The wife of the neighbor recalled that Kimmel looked as white as the uniform he was wearing.
But Admiral Kimmel's day is about to get a whole lot worse. As the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor rages, USS West Virginia and USS Oklahoma have been hit by torpedoes, killing hundreds of sailors. Many more are now fighting for their lives in heroic feats of bravery. One such feat involves the West Virginia's Captain Mervyn Benyon, who is hit by flying shrapnel.
They needed to get the captain off the bridge because the fires were starting to envelop the lower portion of the ship.
Enter mess attendant Doris Miller.
As Dory Miller is proceeding to his assigned battle station, an officer flags him down and asks him to help him move the commanding officer of West Virginia to a safer location. The status of African Americans in the United States Navy in 1941 was to segregate the races, whites from blacks. And the Navy did that by limiting the ratings for which African Americans could qualify.
After moving his commanding officer, Mess Attendant Miller joins in the ship's defense, despite having had no training.
He sees an unmanned anti-aircraft gun. And according to his own account, Miller says, I just shot it. I wasn't sure what to do. All Dory Miller wanted to do was be in the fight. Fighting the enemy was not laying out another man's clothes, cooking and serving his meals.
"10,000 feet above the harbor, high-level bombers now prepare for the next deadly assault.
The coup de grace of the first wave is the high-level bomber attack led by Commander Fuchida himself.
The high-level bombing units circled around the western side of Oahu and lined up for an attack run on the battleships.
Their aim is to destroy the battleships that have survived the torpedo raids unscathed. The inboard giants at Battleship Row, USS Maryland, USS Tennessee, and USS Arizona. The bombers drop their payloads simultaneously. A Japanese photo shows the moment of impact on Arizona's stern.
One of the shells has bounced off the faceplate of gun turret number 3 and exploded into the water side of it.
A bomb dropped between us and the vessel, and it blew me inside the hatch, knocked me silly. And of course, that set off the wildfire.
The repair ship Vestal sustained 2 hits and almost sank right then and there, not from the explosions, but from the flooding, because the bombs went clear through the ship.
On the USS Arizona, bosun's mate John Anderson goes to help his twin brother Delbert on one of the ship's anti-aircraft batteries, unaware that a second group of bombers has the Arizona in their sights.
So I started up the ladder to the boat deck where all the anti-aircraft guns were. Well, I got to the top of the ladder,
And the enormous explosion occurred, and people were just blown all over the place.
That bomb lands just slightly behind turret number 2. It goes through the deck armor and into the powder rooms for Arizona's main guns and detonates there. The result is that about 1 million pounds of propellant go up instantaneously. Forward end of the ship and her masts go up by as much as 40 feet before settling back down again. So she's literally being blown out of the water.
There's all kinds of body parts. There was nothing I could do to do it for anything, and a tremendous fire broke out.
The bow of the 32,500-ton Arizona is split from the rest of the superstructure.
The explosion of the Arizona's forward magazines incinerated instantly almost everything that was in the forward half of the ship.
Half or more of Arizona's crew is killed outright by that conflagration, and many others are very badly injured by flash burns.
There were fire from the mainmast forward. The flames would float up hundreds of feet in the air, and it was awful. But we're just lucky that we were alive. Well, the ones coming out of the fire, we got 12, 14 of them in there. They were still alive. A lot of them didn't live long.
I grabbed a guy by the hand who was on fire, and I held on to him. And he was from Greenfield, Ohio. I never forgot that. And I saved him. I got him out of there.
Just over 10 minutes into the attack, the strike on Arizona takes the number of US deaths to nearly 1,800. As the battleships burn, a new horror is about to be suffered by crewmen on the torpedoed USS Oklahoma.
It is a confusing, eerie, and nightmarish situation on the Oklahoma, as nothing can stop this ship from going over.
It's as if a monster took its claws and tore out the outside skin of the Oklahoma and allowed the water to flood through.
If they are on the quarterdeck, they are lucky. The roll of the ship is so slow that a great many of them can simply walk over the railing on the starboard side and then walk onto the keel of the ship. Unfortunately, those are the minority of the sailors on the Oklahoma. The majority have taken shelter below decks, which is where they are required to be during an aerial attack.
Over 400 men are trapped in the bowels of the ship, and as the battle rages on above them, the air is running out.
Now that the ship had totally capsized, what has been the deck is now the ceiling. And you're in this compartment that is your coffin.
After just 30 minutes, the first wave of Japanese planes depart, and a lull settles over the harbor. USS Arizona has been blown in half. USS West Virginia is sinking fast, and USS Oklahoma nearby has capsized. Just one of the 8 battleships, USS Nevada, manages to get underway and head for safety.
Chief Bosun's Mate Edwin Hill leads a team to get the Nevada unmoored from the dock. He leaves the ship and he cuts the line and he jumps into the water and he swims back to the Nevada.
But when it threw the lines away and backed away and started down the channel, everybody saw it. It was right in the middle of the channel.
Nevada's move is a gutsy move, and it demonstrates to everyone in the harbor that we are not just going to sit here and take it.
But the attack is far from over. a second wave of Japanese planes are already racing towards the stricken ships.
It had been quiet for a while, but then you could start hearing loud explosions again, so you know that it had started again.
167 planes make up this second wave. 78 dive bombers, 35 fighters, and 54 high-altitude bombers.
By this time, there was much, much heavier anti-aircraft fire because the Americans were fully alerted, they had plenty of targets, and they were blind, fighting mad.
For the Japanese pilots, one ship clearly stands out.
When they arrive over Pearl Harbor, the thing that they see is the battleship Nevada.
It had been hit, so it was suffering fires, but it got underway, headed for the mouth of Pearl Harbor and the open sea.
It becomes an obvious target for the Japanese flyers. They're swarming around like bees around a honeypot.
All the bombers and fighters in the air, the Japanese hit it. The Nevada got attacked by everybody.
Its crews were still shooting back at the Japanese, who were now really focused on hitting the Nevada.
The battleship Nevada, the visible symbol that we are resisting vigorously with everything that we've got.
The sight of this ship underway, on fire, and people remembered its flag still flying at the rear, moved some people to tears.
Many of the men who saw this said that it was one of the finest things they saw all day long.
Nevada was, it was quite a scene.
Dive bombers bracketed her with near miss after near miss after near miss. And finally, she was struck by 5 bombs.
It soon becomes clear to those on board that they're not going to be able to get to the open sea.
She was down by the head so much, and she was on fire so heavily that the captain made the decision to ground the ship on Hospital Point. And then the tugs later pulled her across the channel, and there she ended her sortie. She lost quite a number of men.
57 people die as a result of the attack, including Edwin Hill, the man who helped get the Nevada underway.
Edwin Hill, he is working on the forecastle, and he is blown off the side of the ship, and he is killed instantly.
Nevada, she docked herself because she didn't want to get sunk in the channel. Everybody acted 100% the way they're supposed to act. There wasn't anybody on that ship that did wrong what they were trained to do.
As the second wave pounds the harbor, Oahu's airfields again come under attack. Japanese bombers return to strike the Kanahoe Air Station in the east of the island.
Japanese planes were flying in formation and dropped another bomb on the hangar. There was a fellow sitting on the hangar door, and when that bomb came in, it looked like he tried to stand up, and then he sat back down. When they walked over to him, he was dead. And it turned out that that bomb, a tiny piece of shrapnel, went directly into his heart, through his chest. Since we didn't have any guns to fire back at them, we tried to stay out of the way.
Meanwhile, back at the harbor, Japanese dive bombers now have a new target. Across the harbor from Battleship Row is Dry Dock Number 1, where 3 ships, including USS Pennsylvania, are being refitted.
The second wave has orders to go in and hit some of the capital ships that have not been hit by the first wave.
The USS Pennsylvania suffers a direct hit from a 550-pound bomb. Frank Emond, now 103, was on board.
The bomb went right down through the center of the ship, hits the 6-inch steel deck, and exploded upwards. I was knocked up off the deck about 3 or 4 inches. Luckily, we were in the back part of the ship, so we were not injured in the bomb explosion.
24 men are killed and 29 wounded as a result of the blast.
Being a stretcher bearer, I had to go help pick up the dead and wounded people. The memory that sticks in my mind is trying to pick up bodies that were close to the explosion. The skin had been burnt, and you could smell the burnt flesh. We went up and found them, and we got them in the stretcher, and were able to take them to where they needed to go.
Near Pennsylvania, another battleship, USS Shaw, is also hit. That moment is captured in one of the most iconic photographs from the day.
The Shaw is hit right on its bow that explodes the forward magazine and blows the bow right on off. And there is an enormous, thunderous explosion that almost dwarfs what had happened to the Arizona.
Finally, 2.5 hours after the attack began, the Japanese planes turn and head for the safety of their carriers.
The place is an absolute shambles. You have a number of sunken battleships, Arizona heavily afire with her superstructure collapsing forward.
It was just awful. This was an American horror story they were living through.
But could the onslaught now be finally over? Following the withdrawal of the last Japanese planes, the Americans wait in anticipation for a possible third wave attack. But it never comes. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo withdraws his forces and turns back to Japan.
Nagumo looks at his orders and he says, you know, I was tasked with sinking 4 American battleships. The initial assessment says that I've gotten at least that many. The mission is a success. We're going home.
The once mighty U.S. Pacific Fleet now lies in ruins, and 5 of its 8 battleships have been sunk. The total toll on American life is huge. 2,390 are killed and 1,179 wounded. The vast majority are junior enlisted personnel, a few years out of high school. On Oahu's airfields, 347 planes have been destroyed or damaged, significantly more than the Japanese had expected.
The Japanese had accomplished beyond their wildest dreams. They obviously were very disappointed that carriers were not in port, but they had damaged the battle line of the Pacific Fleet. It would never be the same.
The Japanese lose just 65 men, along with 5 midget submarines. Of the 350 aircraft they launched, just 29 failed to return. The attack may be over, but the battle to save the wounded and rescue those trapped inside burning and capsized ships now ramps up.
There's fuel oil that is floating on top, in some cases on fire. Same thing, there are pools of gasoline and whatnot. And so you can understand that just getting these guys out of the water in many cases was very difficult.
One of the sailors went out in one of these boats to pick up survivors and wound up picking bodies up.
There just wasn't enough people to deal with the high rate of casualties. The hospitals were full. The hospital ship Solace was taking on more casualties than it could. The doctors were working feverishly.
One fellow was lying there. There wasn't room for him. We didn't have a hospital, of course. I felt extremely sorry for him. Young man that was a half hour earlier was perfectly healthy, and now he was he couldn't even feel his legs.
Rescue operations at the harbour continue into the night. But on some ships, rescue is almost impossible.
One of the toughest stories of Pearl Harbor is the story of the Oklahoma that capsizes in the course of the attack when hit by torpedoes. Many men manage to get off, they get onto the hull and they're rescued, but many more are left inside the ship.
Once the ship rolls over, up is down, down is up. It is complete darkness. Sailors are trapped in air pockets. They are covered in oil. They can't see. It is a place where sailors have become entombed.
At this point, there is no way for them to get out. They're simply trapped underneath the hull, and they have to wait for rescuers.
It's a delicate task. To get to the trapped men, rescuers make holes in the submerged hull, but face the hazard of water rushing in to replace the escaping air.
Yard workers described seeing the hands coming out of the hole, and with not having the air in there, they would drown right in front of them, and they would see the hands retreat from the hole.
But rescuers come up with a solution.
They were dealing with this problem, and as yard workers and people with technical skills, they would pump air into that compartment before they could get the men out. Navy federal workers managed to save 32 men, and that was significant. And it was something after the attack that they could take pride in. They had seen so much death.
With the Pacific Fleet lying in ruins and nearly 2,400 dead, all eyes now turn to what America will do next.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Within 24 hours of the attack, President Roosevelt signs a declaration of war against Japan. It's passed by Congress after he makes one of the most iconic speeches in American history.
This form of treachery shall never again endanger us.
A date that will live in infamy, that absolutely encapsulated the American mood at this point, that we are furious about this attack.
The day that will live in infamy really spoke to a lot of people, and the cowardly nature of the attack also added to that. So Remember Pearl Harbor became a kind of a slogan.
For thousands of young Americans, the attack on Pearl Harbor is a calling.
Americans are now eager for retaliation. You couldn't keep people away from the recruiting stations. The reason for that is because they believed that getting into the U.S. Navy was the surest fire way of punishing the Japanese for what happened at Pearl Harbor.
Japan's aim of demoralizing America to bring them to the negotiating table doesn't come to pass.
One of the biggest mistakes made with Pearl Harbor is that they underestimated Americans. They hoped to not only decimate our fleet, but to break the American spirit.
But in that, they were wrong. The Japanese miscalculated the American retaliation because in 1942, Americans got together to fight a war in the Atlantic and a war in the Pacific simultaneously. And in the end, they helped conquer two fascist empires that were set on world domination.
You can make a credible argument that Japan lost World War II as soon as the first bomb fell on Ford Island.
Within weeks of declaring war on Japan, a commission is set up to investigate the circumstances of the Pearl Harbor attack. It finds Commanders Admiral Husband Kimmel and General Walter Short guilty of dereliction of duty.
If you're in a position of command and something goes wrong, you have to take the blame for it, and you have to fall on your sword.
They were fine officers. They deserved better. But ultimately, that responsibility rested on their shoulders.
The need for battleships to fight the war brings urgency to salvaging and restoring the crippled Pacific Fleet. Within weeks of the raid, the gargantuan task gets underway, led by Captain Homer Walling.
The dramatic salvage operations undertaken by Homer Walling were nothing short of a miracle.
Of the ships that were damaged and sunk at Pearl Harbor, there were only 3 that were not repaired and returned to service. The Utah, which had capsized, the hulk of the Arizona, which had been blown apart, and the Oklahoma, all the other ships were returned to service.
Today, at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, lies the ghostly wreckage of the USS Arizona.
The Arizona has become this symbol of the attack, really quite a moving place to go.
It's a place where people could come and walk upon the memorial, see the names of the dead of the USS Arizona, and touch history.
80 years after the attack, for the few remaining survivors, the memories are still painfully fresh.
There are not many of us left from Pensacola, only about 2, I think. And I'm glad to see, though, that the people in general are still remembering that it happened, and hopefully that they're doing whatever they need to not let it happen again.
Any way you look at it, war is a terrible thing, and it's especially when you're in the middle of it. There's nothing you can do but just join your fellows and try to survive.
1,177 on the Arizona. My shipmates lost. I'm not a hero. Those are the heroes. They're the ones that lost their lives.